Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga. On the show, I help yoga teachers make sense of the parts of teaching that often feel harder than expected, especially around anatomy and how to apply it to your cues and your sequences, and how to truly feel confident when you're teaching your classes. Here, you'll learn easy, practical ways to understand anatomy using my step-by-step blueprint and how to apply it directly to your cues and sequences so teaching feels clearer and more grounded so you feel present and more confident. We'll also talk honestly about the inner side of teaching, things like self-doubt, growth, and what actually helps you feel confident over time. You can find daily videos and additional support over on my Instagram and my TikTok channels. On both those platforms, I'm at Bare Bones Yoga. All right, let's get into today's episode. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 397, which means we're just a couple of episodes away from a milestone, episode 400. And I'm just going to say right off the bat, I want to know what you think we should do to commemorate this milestone. So let me know. Do you want to have an online podcast listening party? Do you want to have just like an online class? Obviously we need to do something online so we can capture all the listeners because they're all over the globe. But I'd love to know, what do you think is something we should do to commemorate 400 episodes? I remember when we crossed, I want to say, was it 200 or 300? I did do a podcast party online, and it was like a mini class slash short workshop with some prizes. So I've done that sort of thing before, but I'd love to know what you think, especially if you're listening for the first time or multiple times. You're part of this podcast community, and I'd love to do something that's something you want to do. So right off the top, send me a DM, send me an email, let me know your thoughts. Now, I am recording this on March 26th, 2026, and this will go live on March 30th, 2026. And I'm just going to be straight up with you and real. This is going to be kind of a working session. This calendar year, 2026, I've done a little more sort of pre-scripting, not really for any reason other than just a desire to be maybe a little more organized when I actually press record. But truth be told, I feel pretty good about my ability to just spontaneously talk to you, speak with you, have a conversation with you about the different topics that I come here to present. But I will say today's gotten a little bit away from me, and I always record on Thursday for the show on Monday to go live. And right now it's 5:30 on Thursday, and I like to just do what I plan to do. I like to have my word mean something. And so when I say I'm going to record on Thursdays, even though I work for myself, I like to keep my own word. So here we are before dinner time. I'm going to record this, and this will go live on Monday. And honestly, this is a topic that I'm really excited about, and it kind of feels a little different for me. I spend a lot of the podcast here sharing with you techniques around cueing and sequencing, helping just expose you to different ideas around the application of anatomy to movement. And I love doing that. And every once in a while, I sort of get inspired by something happening in my personal life or something somebody says that sparks an idea. And that's really where the focus, the idea for the focus of today's episode comes from. So over the past week, I went on vacation. So I just want to tell you a little more about the inspiration, where it came from. And I was on vacation in St. Martin, and we were traveling with a group. And inevitably, whenever we go to St. Martin, people know I'm a yoga teacher, and there's a pool at the house. And inevitably, because I practice in the morning, people will come down and practice with me. And I don't make a big deal of it, but I do say to people, hey, I'm going to be practicing in the morning. If you'd like to join in, here's about the time we're going to do it. And so I always get one or two people a couple of days that were there practicing with me. And I always have such great conversations about yoga with the people we're traveling with. And it just gives me such a good opportunity to get into the mind of someone who is practicing yoga. From a marketing perspective, you could say like a yoga consumer, like what are they looking for? And, I'm going to be honest with you, most of the people that I go on vacation with are, I mean, I'm 61, so these are people in their 50s and 60s. And I would probably say it's safe to say what somebody at that age is looking for from yoga is going to be different from what somebody in their younger ages are going to be looking for. But believe it or not, just like a good old Venn diagram, there are absolutely places of overlap. And I actually think there's more places of overlap than you might think. Things like improved flexibility, improved strength, improved mobility, improved focus, improved balance, improved mental health. And so, as I was thinking about this when I was on vacation, on the flight home, I thought, oh man, I would love to do a podcast series on these different areas that people want to focus on. So things like yoga for joint mobility, yoga for flexibility, yoga for building strength, on and on. So I made a list of 10 different areas that I wanted to focus on. And the first one that I wanted to pick is one that I really haven't spoken to all that much, and it's yoga for mental health. And truth be told, I'm sort of framing it in this way because I want it to mimic what someone might Google when they go online and they're looking for how can yoga help me with whatever my concern is. And so in this case, imagine somebody goes online, they open Google and they type in yoga for mental health. So we know, of course, the mindset of that person is they're looking for improved mental health and they're looking at yoga as a tool to potentially help them improve their mental health. So that's the first one we're going to be doing. That's the first one we're going to be doing on today's show. And I'll tell you right out of the gate, I already did a podcast episode. I'm sorry, I already did a reel on Instagram that goes into this topic. And I'm also going to do a practice video on my YouTube channel. Yes, I have a YouTube channel. I've had it for many, many years. And I use my YouTube channel occasionally to put longer form practices on there because it just holds that kind of content much better than putting a practice video on the small screen of Instagram or TikTok. So I'll tell you right out, excuse me, don't forget to check out the reel that goes along with this. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channel because every time we do one of these topics here on the pod, you'll have those companion pieces to look at. Now, the easiest way for you to know when I drop a new episode that covers a new topic is to be on my mailing list. That is the best way because I always write to my mailing list every Monday. I give them the latest podcast episode. I give them the links to the companion pieces on the different platforms. So if you don't want to have to worry about missing one of these things, go to my website, barebonesyoga.com. Right there on the bottom of the homepage, you can enter your email and then we'll be connected and you'll have the advantage of getting the emails that keep you on track with this stuff. So just to give you again the broad brush of the topics, these are coming up for you. So today we're doing yoga for mental health. We're going to do yoga for longevity, yoga for flexibility, yoga for fascial release, yoga for balance, yoga for bone health, yoga for strength, yoga for cardiac health, yoga for joint mobility, yoga for core and back strength. So that's 10 topics. I don't know if I'll do 10 consecutive weeks here on the pod covering each one, or if I'll intersperse them throughout other topics that we talk about here. And that will pretty much cover us through the rest of the year. But stay connected because that's what's coming. So the first thing, as we talk about yoga for mental health, is I wanted to talk about what are some of the considerations of what would go into a sequence that was focused on mental health. And so I don't know if I've ever shared with you, I have a background in mental health support. I initially went to college. I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist. I then decided after 2.5 years of the PT program at Boston University here in Boston that I wanted to be a rehab counselor instead. So I swapped area of focus in BU from PT to rehab counseling. And I graduated with my undergrad degree in rehab counseling. So that allowed me to become a licensed rehab counselor. And a lot of what I did was work with people with different mental illnesses, different psychiatric disabilities, helping them get jobs, helping them with just weekly counseling. And then I went on to pursue becoming a social worker. And I then worked in a clinical setting, actually several clinical settings, hospitals, rehab center for head injured patients. And in that capacity, I also did counseling with these clients. So I have a background in mental health. And so these suggestions that I'm sharing with you come from that background. Okay, I don't want you to think I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall. They come from my background in coaching people, not only in my own program, but counseling under the umbrella of being a clinical social worker and being a rehab counselor, which are licensed professions and happen in hospitals. So I just wanted to, because I know that there's sometimes concern out there. People say, oh, these podcasters are sharing information about, whatever self-help area of expertise they're purporting to have, but these people don't even have qualifications for that. So I wanted to just state that for the record. So these are just top level themes. Oh, and of course, being a yoga teacher for 22 years and teaching anatomy, that obviously gets into the benefits of yoga from a mental health perspective, because you're looking at the impact of yoga on the nervous system, the impact of yoga on the vagus nerve, the impact of yoga on downregulation of the nervous system, right? So I don't want to devalue the value of 22 years of teaching as an additional qualification. So again, this is not to toot my own horn, but it's just to give a little bit of context to where what I'm going to share with you is coming from. So considerations, if you're going to teach classes and you want to focus on yoga for mental health, which, let's be real, it's not like you're going to put that on a poster. You're probably not going to market your yoga class as a yoga class to improve your mental health. You're probably going to call it something different, because most likely people that are struggling with mental health issues are probably not going to want to self-select into a class like that in a public studio. So there's other ways you're going to most likely frame that offer. But if you, like me, have taught yoga in a hospital, in a treatment facility of some kind, uh, in different nonprofits that specifically support people with mental illness, obviously that's your job, that's your role. Okay, so you're not going to need to call it something different. But I just wanted to add that piece in. Now, the last thing I'll say before we get to some of the details is that you could teach in the way I'm describing without even saying anything about it being for improved mental health. You could just teach like this in your open classes in the studio, and guess what? No one has to know what the focus is behind the scenes except you. And the good news is they're going to get the benefits. So I leave that up to you as to how you use this. So considerations if you're teaching a class or a series of classes focused on improving mental health. Number one, focus on the breath to regulate the nervous system. So I don't have to tell you that yoga is a breathing practice, right? We hear that all the time. And I also probably don't need to tell you, you know from your own human experience that when you take time throughout the day to take a deep breathing break, you inevitably feel better. And when you practice yoga, you inevitably feel better, in large part because of the effect of deep breathing on your nervous system. And this, of course, happens for the people who come to your classes as well. But there's a little bit of a different way. If you're going in to teach a class and that's your MO, that you want it to be focused on mental health, you're obviously going to turn up the volume on the emphasis on the breath. So what might that look like? That might look like before you get into the standing series, you do a little pranayama. It might look like cues that focus on the breath, maybe a little bit more than usual. It might look like a longer shavasana with a down regulation exercise, focusing on deep breathing before you leave them in silence, right? So now we're going from concept to how do I implement that? From concept to strategy. Now we get from from building knowledge to the application of knowledge. Okay, so that's point one. Point two is a regular class sequence to build familiarity and decrease the element of surprise. A lot of people don't think of the aspect of this idea of changing your sequence all the time on the students from a nervous system perspective. Remember when you went to your first yoga class? Remember how freaked out you were because you didn't know what to do. Now, imagine if every single time somebody goes to your yoga class, you're teaching a completely different sequence. That's going to be pretty triggering to them, right? That's going to be something that sort of, now they get that feeling of, oh my God, I have to learn a brand new sequence again. So this is why I like to speak to this aspect of sort of leaning into a regular sequence. And if you are going to be teaching a class where you're focusing um, on mental health, it's really important that you have a regularity to your sequence. So this is part of the value of giving people consistent sequences. You allow them to come into class and feel to a certain extent like they know what to expect. Maybe it's not going to be exactly the same, but hey, this is going to feel familiar. And in that feeling familiar is less of that triggering effect of what just naturally comes with newness. So that's number two. Point number three is grounding postures. Now, when I talk about grounding postures here, I'm sort of referring to poses that where you're close to the ground. So something like child's pose comes to mind, something like laying on the back and hugging the knees into the chest or doing a spinal twist comes to mind. So poses where they literally are on the ground. And the reason I bring this up is because from an energetic standpoint, when you take people and put them close to the ground and sort of support them with cues that speak to the feeling of being on the ground, you can sort of shift from that paradigm of, oh, you're collapsed on the floor because your world is falling apart. And you can now sort of reframe that as you're on the ground absorbing the energy of the solidness of the earth to give you strength. You're on the ground to, sort of, I don't want to say surrender to what is, because that again also sort of heightens the awareness of the mental state, but you're on the ground to get support. It's kind of like in today times when people say go out and touch grass or don't forget to touch grass, or people talk about grounding exercises where they walk out on their lawn in bare feet. That speaks to, in a way, sort of the electromagnetic forces of the earth. Even if we look at it through the lens of anatomy, ground reaction forces, right? So, kind of the impact on the nervous system of the impact of the body on the ground. And that does happen in standing poses, but it also happens just in laying on the ground, allowing your muscles and bones to just relax towards the floor. So this is part of what I wanted to share as well is, maybe starting your class out with something that is a grounding series. Having them be on the back, having them do child's pose, having them do a spinal twist, having them hug the knees into the chest. Number 4, clear action-oriented cues. Clear action-oriented cues. And so this facilitates just clarity of mind, right? And also prevents any possible trigger that they might hear in your words to a painful memory, to an unpleasant state of mind, right? And this is something that's pretty tricky for yoga teachers because a lot of teachers use very artistic, esoteric language. And, it's really, really helpful and really, really important. And I know this from my own clinical work with patients, that your language be, and I'm going to talk about this when we get to point number 8, be very neutral. And so when I talk to you about the different types of cues, and the first one being action cues, this is a perfect example of that, using clear action-oriented cues that just provide clarity as to what you want them to do without any implication or connection to anything else. Number 5, asking them questions to spark introspection. So this is less of you should be feeling your hamstrings lengthen in this pose, and more of what do you notice in this pose? How are you feeling in the pose? Do you feel any sense of release in your right hip versus your left hip? But it's definitely not, if you feel like you're going to cry, go ahead and cry. Or it's not getting into that whole story that many yoga teachers share about emotions being held in the hips. We don't have time to go into that now. I don't actually believe that in the literal sense that a lot of teachers believe. And I'm happy to talk to you offline about this so you can touch base with me if you want to talk about it. But I think it is so important that, especially when we're teaching folks who are dealing with mental health challenges, that that we don't say things like, if you feel like you need to cry, or emotions live in your hips. Do you feel the release of emotions, or it's not? This is part of sparking trauma, rather than just asking questions and giving them agency over what their experience is. Number 6 is sort of goes without saying, but I'll say it. Giving people a longer shavasana, giving them time to integrate what you just did with them or what they just did. Now, having said that, keep in mind, some people find stillness triggering. And you may look out at the room and see some people with their eyes open in shavasana. This is fine, right? We don't need to say anything like, oh, if you're having a hard time closing your eyes, it's okay to just, this is just the way they're doing it. We don't need to point it out. We don't need to give them permission to close or open or whatever it is. Letting them be as they are is unspoken permission. And certainly avoiding correcting them is also communicating permission. Number 7, no music or quiet music without words. This is really, really important because you never know that song that you love might really bring up painful memories for a student, especially romantic songs, songs about relationships, songs about letting go, songs about anything that has an emotional component. We do not, and this is a general rule, we do not want to be playing those songs in our classes. Now, if you have a special class and you do a rock out to a certain kind of music or whatever it is, and people know that on the front end, that's different. But in general yoga classes, I encourage you to forget about the music or use music with no words. Number 8 is a little bit about what I talked about before with regard to cueing. It's using neutral language, neutral with respect to state of mind or anything that could potentially bring up pain or trauma or memories. We're just telling people what we want them to do from a physical movement perspective, using clear language. And we might ask a question or two. What do you notice in this pose? How does this feel in your body? And some of that is because for people who have lived through trauma or experienced trauma, I mean, that's the same thing, or people that have some sort of physical challenge, many times they disconnect from their body. They opt out of feeling, right? People with eating disorders are a perfect example of this, unfortunately. And so when you ask them, what do you notice? This is often an invitation that they don't get in their life because their focus is often on how do I look? What are people thinking about me? It's very external. So now you're giving them an opportunity to notice, what do I notice? I can remember I had a student one time after class, she asked me sort of quietly why she couldn't feel her core when I cued to pull the belly button in, hug the sides of the waist in. And we talked a little bit about it. And I was doing a little bit of kind of a somatic exercise with her after class. And she admitted to me she'd had several bouts of abdominal surgery for, I can't remember what the reason was. And she was starting to make the connection between the multiple surgeries, her disconnection from her abdomen in terms of feeling it, noticing it. And yet she was in class, she was hearing my cues to the core, and she was starting to wonder, why don't I feel anything here? Like, what, this is sort of dulled this area of my body. So what a great realization, what a great and powerful and profound door has been opened up to her, not because I said, oh, you should be feeling this or you should be feeling that, simply because I provided some clear action cues. Number 9 is fundamental foundational poses. So this is where I'm making the distinction between the grounding poses we talked about before, and now these are more standing foundational poses. And this is where we really get into things like being on the feet, ground reaction forces, um, feelings, and we'll talk about this in a moment when I share the study with you that I brought to talk to you about. Feeling power from the ground up, right? We can talk about it energetically, we can talk about it musculoskeletally, but this is an important part of improving one's mental health is getting them on their feet, doing these poses that are upright. Number 10 is a slower, more intentional flow versus whipping them through sun salutations versus like a cardiac focused flow. Slower and intentional, giving people time to feel what's going on. And then number 11 is poses with an erect spine and open chest. And we're really going to get into that when I share the results of the study with you. So I also want to refer you to episode 355, where I spoke with psychologist Dr. Lauren Tober. This was last year. We had done a podcast kind of swap. I was on hers and she was on my podcast. And with her background in psychology and being a yoga teacher, she was, very qualified to speak on this. And she had some really interesting I don't want to say revelations, but really interesting thoughts on the role of a yoga teacher when it comes to supporting the mental health of students. So I really encourage you to go back and listen to episode 355. Now, in terms of the study, I want to share with you a study. I did a little Googling in preparation for us talking today to look for articles that speak to the benefit of yoga to one's mental health. And I found this interesting article called Yoga Poses Increase Subjective Energy and Feeling of Self-Esteem in Comparison to Power Poses. And it's in the journal Frontiers in Psychology, and it was published in May of 2017. So it's not super recent, but it holds water here. Now, I will include the link to the study in the show notes. So if you want to read the actual study, the link will be there. Now, I want to just set the stage for you because when they're talking here in the study about power poses, I don't know if you ever watched one of the most watched TED Talks ever on YouTube by Dr. Amy Cuddy here in Boston at Harvard University. Dr. Cuddy did a study years ago where she put people in power poses and she did a mock interview with them. And she had them do a power pose before the mock interview. And then the other group didn't do a power pose before the mock interview. And then she measured the release of different hormones like cortisol and testosterone to see how taking a power pose affected one's mindset and feelings and perception. And did that elevate certain positive feelings in people and help them do better in a job interview. And when she talked about power posing, she talked about some of the typical poses that, quite frankly, men take all the time and women rarely take. So things like standing. Imagine like you're standing in a conference room, you have a wide stance, you have your arms crossed in front of you. Imagine you're sitting in a conference room in one of those like swivel chairs and you have your feet up on the table. Imagine you are standing in front of a conference room table and someone is sitting at the table. You're standing there and you sort of have your hands on the table and you're leaning closer to them. Like these are corporate power poses. And she did this study to see if I take somebody and have them do one of these power poses before they do this mock job interview, does it help elevate their testosterone and cortisol to the point where it literally affects their biology hormonally to change their state of mind to help them get the job? So I just wanted to define that and make that Amy Cuddy reference. it's a really good TED Talk and really interesting. So even though when she talks about power posing, she's not talking about yoga poses. And here in the context of this study, they're making a distinction between yoga poses and power poses. But because the research, when this particular study came out, the research from Amy Cuddy and her group was already out there. And honestly, people were already starting to kind of question the results that she was positing. And that's part of what comes up in this study here. So I'll just kind of give you the idea here. They talk about research on beneficial consequences of yoga, focus on the effect of breathing and meditation. But less is known about the psychological effects of performing yoga postures. This study investigates the effect of yoga poses on one's subjective sense of energy and self-esteem. The effects of yoga poses were compared to the effects of power poses, which arguably increase the sense of power and self-confidence due to their association with interpersonal dominance, what I would call feeling empowered. So that sort of sets the stage. So they go into the introduction and they say, recent research showed that momentarily assuming open and expansive body postures, i.e. power poses, increase self-reports of feeling more personal control and power. The authors attributed this effect to the meaning of interpersonal dominance that expansive body postures communicate. People who assume powerful poses look and feel in power. So that sort of sets the stage for the power posing part. But then they go into talking about yoga. So they say, in addition, research on the practice of yoga, a non-competitive physical exercise, combined with breathing and meditation, indicates that practicing yoga is associated with improved psychological well-being and positive self-esteem. Practicing yoga postures improves vagal tone, increasing bodily energetic resources. This suggests that performing yoga postures may increase bodily energetic resources and the subjective sense of energy and positively affect how you view yourself, what they call self-views. Thus, we propose that comparing the effect of power poses to the effect of yoga poses may suggest an alternate mechanism underlying the effect of body postures on psychological states. So what they basically did, I want to jump to how they actually comprise the study for you. So here we go. So they had a study with 76 people. And what they basically did is they sort of set up kind of a fake scenario for the people. They told the people they were going to do some sort of cognitive analysis of them after doing some poses. So the people in the study didn't actually know what the study was truly going to look at. And so after giving their consent, participants responded to demographic questions and completed this self-esteem questionnaire in order to assess their baseline level of self-esteem before doing the study. They were then led into a lab cubicle to perform the body postures. The study closely followed the procedure of blah, 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 using the same blah, 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 blah. Okay. What they did, the order of the poses was always the same. And they were told to hold Tadasana and Urdhva Hastasana, so standing with the arms up in the air. And then they were told to hold Eagle pose on the right and on the left. And then they had 2 power poses to do. Okay, and then after they did these poses, they completed a post-pose questionnaire, which asked them certain questions about the postures. So let me just jump to the conclusion or the discussion, right? So the results of the present study suggest that momentarily performing standing yoga poses with open or covered front of the body in comparison to high and low power poses, expansive and constrictive body postures tested in previous studies, improved the self-esteem of the person through increasing the subjective sense of energy and empowerment feeling more in control, feeling in power, feeling energetic, and feeling empowered. This effect was particularly pronounced when baseline trait of self-esteem was controlled for. This indicates that the effect of the yoga poses on the state of self-esteem was independent of participants' trait-like self-view and occurred over and above the effect of the participants, how they viewed themselves. So let me just go to the final conclusion, and I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase here. What these researchers concluded is the present study demonstrates that momentarily performing 4 standing yoga poses in comparison to these power poses improved the self-esteem of the person. This effect was independent of how much self-esteem they had before they did the poses and driven by an increase in the subjective sense of being energetic, empowered, and in control. This increase occurred in comparison to power poses, argued to increase the subjective sense of empowerment. The findings suggest that the effects of body postures on the subjective sense of empowerment are most likely driven by a different mechanism than their association with interpersonal dominance. Although these results are preliminary, they suggest that yoga poses can positively affect psychological states. The results have potential applicability in interventions for improving psychological well-being, which was exactly what I was looking for when I went into the research. So I want you to just think about, even if you're not going into your class with a focus on improving mental health, just by virtue of you teaching your class, you are helping to improve the mental health of the people in your class. And you certainly know how this feels as a student as well. And so I want you to just kind of keep that in mind. And this, really speaks to something that I speak to a lot, which is I want you to really, if you don't already, I want you to really see how important the work is that you're doing. More important now than ever. In this world full of chaos and everybody feeling, not everybody, many people feeling a lack of control because so many things are happening that we have no control over. People's mental health and being able to positively affect that is a skill that not a lot of people have. And you have that skill just by virtue of you going into the room and teaching yoga. And so if you haven't fully embraced that part of what you do, I am here to remind you of that. Because, for me, my goal is to support you in the fullest way possible so that when you go in to teach your classes, you are clear. You are not carrying what I call a spiritual backpack on your back full of you feeling insecure, you feeling undertrained, you feeling overwhelmed, you feeling confused about how to speak to anatomy in your cues, you feeling triggered by the beginners in the front of the room. My focus and my passion is helping you get clear on all that so that you can go in and facilitate these transformations in your students. And when I say transformations, I know that's a bit of an overused new agey term. I'm not talking about people in your classes having these massive epiphanies, but I am talking about, like, this is empirical research that points out the very real benefits to one's mental health that simply come from taking yoga. And so I really want to share this with you, and it's coming from a place of helping you, appreciate the really pivotal role you are playing in the lives of the people who come to your classes. So the last thing I'll say is, again, I'm going to include the link to the study in the show notes. If you have any questions about how to find the YouTube practice video, you can always just send me a DM. I'm going to do that over the next day or so and get that posted on my YouTube channel. All the links to my YouTube channel, my social media is all right off my website, barebonesyoga.com. So that's an easy way to get there. Probably easier than just going on YouTube and typing in Karen Fabian, but you could try that. And so that's it. I hope that you found this one interesting and thought-provoking. I thank you so much for sticking around till the end of the episode, and I hope that that you found this helpful. So I'll talk to you next week. Have a good week, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If anything we talked about resonated with you, especially around anatomy, cueing, or feeling more confident when you teach, I want you to know that you are not alone. A lot of teachers tell me these are definitely challenges for them. As a thank you for being a podcast listener, I'm offering you $50 off my 4-week Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program. It's a short, focused program designed to help yoga teachers learn anatomy in an easy step-by-step way and how to apply it directly to their teaching. To get the podcast listener discount, you can head over to my Instagram and just send me a DM with the words podcast offer. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.